Who's a backwoodsman from New Jersey that would scare the crap out of the British so hard that they would send their most fierce warrior to fight him and probably get his ass kicked?
The Truth About Colonial London Extras. Washington's Best.
Daniel Morgan.
Daniel Morgan, born July 6, 1736, in the village of New Hampton in today's Lebanon Township, New Jersey. Born the fifth of 7 children, there wasn't much time for schooling in his youth, yet Morgan showed himself to be a stubborn teen. He left home at 17 following a fight with his father. He worked in odd jobs and lived off the land in Pennsylvania until becoming a teamster. After a couple years, he owned his own team and put his new career to good use as a civilian teamster with his also eventually famous cousin Daniel Boone during the French and Indian War. Here he received 250 lashes from the British for disobedience.
Wow, he must have told them to go you-know-what.
That amount of lashes at once often killed a man. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and Morgan was extremely tough. General Morgan's disdain for the British began here. He first began a military career with provincial forces as a rifleman defending settlers from the French-backed Indian raids along the frontier. He led the reinforcement of defenders under siege at Fort Edwards. From the point he relieved the fort, he immediately took command of its successful defense.
Got a nasty reputation. That's what the girls all say. Got a nasty reputation.
With Morgan's inherent leadership skills on display, he then served in a small conflict called Dunmore's War, raiding the Shawnee. Obtaining glory along the colonial frontier, Daniel Morgan purchased a farm near Winchester, and by 1774 grew prosperous. However, he never forgot the British discipline he received 20 years prior. Those lashes would push the vengeance. Him and his riflemen would return to the Redcoats. The Morgan Riflemen would routinely be among Washington's most elite units during the War for Independence. Without a doubt, he was one of Washington's best. Morgan would continue as a confidant of General Washington and among the leaders putting down the Whiskey Rebellion from 1791 to 1794. This was during Washington's presidency, America's first presidency under the Constitution.
Got a nasty reputation.
Morgan and his men were part of the failed invasion of Quebec early in the war. The assault was foiled when the other prong of the attack failed to rendezvous with Morgan. If the timing wasn't altered and the forces would have joined, it is probable the result would have been a victory, completely changing the outlook for the rest of the war. At a place called Strawberry Hill in Woodbridge during the Battle of Short Hills in New Jersey, Morgan and his riflemen faced a unit of 250 new British troops. This was the first use of the Ferguson repeating rifle that could fire up to 6 shots in a minute and were far more accurate as compared to the Brown Bess. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Captain James Dark, leading this detachment of Morgan's men, held them for a little more than a half hour, allowing the most pivotal happening later in the battle. Again, Morgan and the rest of his men proved themselves valiant alongside Lord Stirling when 500 men held the left flank of the Continental force against no less than 4-to-1 odds. This allowed the bulk of the Americans to reach safety in the highly defensible Watchung Mountains. This heroic stand by Morgan and Stirling's men is legendary. General Howe, commander of the British North American forces at the time, was forced to change his entire strategy in the Northern Theater. Morgan and his men fought with distinction in both battles of Saratoga and are credited with the action that sealed the victory for the Continentals. If we are to pinpoint the most influential happening, one could argue that Morgan at Saratoga was the action that made the American victory possible in the Revolutionary War. He resigned in 1779 but returned after the Battle of Camden in the Southern Theater. He would face off against Lord Tarleton at Cowpens in Virginia. He would masterfully use Tarleton's aggressive tendencies against him. Morgan lured the Redcoats by feigning retreat with his South Carolina and Virginian militia units. The Redcoats would charge into a wall of trained fire, then be enveloped on both flanks by Continental units, including Morgan's famed riflemen. Then the British would be devastated, being enveloped a second time in the rear by Continental and State cavalries. Morgan pulled off the first and only double envelopment of the War for Independence. Of the 2,000 or so British on the field that day, only a couple hundred Redcoats escaped death or capture. After the war, Morgan served Washington during the Whiskey Rebellion. Upon its successful conclusion, Morgan the Warrior retired into civilian life. Famed, he served Virginia's 1st District in the U.S. House of Representatives from March 4th, 1797 until March 5th, 1799. Daniel Morgan died July 6, 1802, on his farm in Winchester, Virginia, at the age of 66.